Good afternoon or good morning. My name is Courtney Barbie. I'm with NewEdge Services, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about the fleet implementation and fuel integration that went along with it for the City of Longview. So on the NewEdge side, again, my name's Courtney. We also have Robert Schermerhorn and Brian Papard. And then with the City of Longview, we have Dale Hawbaker and Joey Westbrook. So a little bit about NewEdge Services. We are a full-service GIS consulting firm out of Frisco, Texas. So that is north of Dallas. But we do have clients all over Texas, a couple in Oklahoma, Louisiana, and Colorado, just to name a few. So some of our team have been in the industry doing GIS consulting since the early 2000s. So we've built a pretty solid team. Today we do everything GIS. We do GIS hosting, enterprise installs, ArcGIS enterprise upgrades, and we also do cloud hosting. So we have quite a few clients where we host their Cityworks application or their GIS database and all their GIS operations. We also do a lot of Cityworks implementations. That's mainly what Robbie and I do. And in more recent years, we've gotten into building custom integrations and applications. We're also a gold level Cityworks implementation partner. And we have been around since 2015. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to Dale for a little bit of background on the City of Longview and their history with Cityworks.
Thanks, Courtney. The City of Longview, Texas, not Washington, started using Cityworks over 15 years ago. They started with the AMS side of Cityworks in our Public Works Department, and it expanded to our Parks and Recreation Department as well. Included a couple or 3 water treatment plants, and also later on we added in our wastewater treatment plant into AMS as well. In late 2013, we added the PLL side of Cityworks, and it's used for all of our permitting, code enforcement, environmental health inspections, and also our alcohol permitting and some city cemetery administration and sales of plots and things there. And then back in December of 2020, we added the fleet implementation that we're here to talk about today, and we went live in mid-December and are still working through that. We have a handful of integrations with Cityworks. CitySource is one of our integrations that we've had for 6 or 7 years or longer now. And then Northstar, our utility billing software, also has a one-way integration with Cityworks. And then the U.S. Bank Voyager fuel software implementation came in as part of our fleet implementation as well here back in December. And I think now it's over to Joy.
Thank you, Dale. Okay, so why do we need to do this implementation in Cityworks? And so basically our previous fleet software was not getting any improvements. It was becoming a dinosaur, and so we thought we need to change and do something different. One option was to purchase new software, which we don't really want to do if we can use something we already have. And so we thought, well, why not use Cityworks? We've already got a license for it, and we can simply, save licensing costs compared to acquiring a new software. And currently, Cityworks, we're working to integrate it with our new ERP software. And so we just decided that was the best option to go with. So now I'll turn it over to Robert Schermerhorn.
All right, so some of the requirements that we had for the Longview fleet implementation was integrating with, U.S. Bank Voyager, integrating those fuel cards into Cityworks, pulling all the mileage, the fuel costs, things of that nature, into Cityworks to be able to create work orders based off of specific intervals set. One thing with the previous software, they were able to pull those readings on, weekly, monthly basis, that sort of thing. But then someone would actually have to, upload that stuff to the software to kind of make the connection. With this integration, it pulls nightly from the US Bank software into Cityworks. So another reason for that integration is to make reports easier. So instead of pulling from a bunch of different sources, all this stuff can be pulled straight from the Cityworks database, via Crystal report or, on the database side itself. Another portion or another requirement we had was, provide better tracking of the part inventory via storeroom. So the previous software also had, a warehouse module as well. And we, adapted and changed and improved upon that to provide better, usage of their warehouse. Another requirement that we wanted to meet was cyclical work orders. So from their old system, they also had, a version of cyclical, but, from doing historical imports from that old database, you can tell that a lot of stuff was going missing in the process. So we improved upon the cyclical workflow quite a bit. So some of the portions of, our implementation, we work with a lot of different groups, and, fleet is kind of a different animal altogether. Doing public works, a lot of times, it's kind of set in stone. You have assets on a map. But one problematic issue with fleet is those vehicles normally are not on the map, and a lot of times they're not even an asset in Cityworks. So the way that we typically do our implementations is we actually create related tables to house all those vehicle assets. So what this gives us is kind of an easier way to search for work against that vehicle or pull the cost history. And then in tandem with the integration we did, you can also pull the fuel history and, costs associated there as well. So and another unique thing with this implementation is they don't actually use the map at all. Everything is pulled in through a GIS search via an inbox. So they're more used to pulling up that stuff from a pick list. So we provided that instead of, having them go through the map and select all those, individual assets there. Another, thing that we did a little differently with, fleet, instead of using work order or child work orders, we opted to use tasks with these work orders. And one of the big reasons behind that is when you're looking at, a fleet work order, typically there's a lot of different service codes that can be tied to an individual work order. So if you have preventative maintenance, let's say, a standard oil change, that's what you're going into the shop for. But at the end of the day, if, during maintenance, they found a lot of issues and there's a lot of repair type codes, you can sit there and mix and match. So instead of having tons and tons of different work order types, it's, limited work order types with a lot of different task type service codes. So it provides a lot more flexibility in that. All right, I'm going to hand it back to Joey.
Thank you, Robbie. We did come across some challenges of all this, and one was just kind of the overall lack of support for the multiple types of ratings that we would have in our vehicles, and having those trigger these preventative maintenance work orders is the first thing we've kind of had to go through and deal with. We found that Cityworks events triggered the email notifications would not work for these preventative type maintenance work orders. That's kind of, we were trying to make things easier, but we found that it would not do this for us. And it was also difficult to manage the vehicle life cycle from the purchase to the sale or retirement of that. And so those are just a couple of the challenges that we rose to and we're trying to work through. Next slide. And we also encountered some unforeseen issues, and the first one was the incorrect information about the vehicle fuel integration, and we found that it was a discrepancy between the unit number and the software that was causing that. And then we found some users that were simply putting in the wrong readings when they would go fill up their vehicle. They might put the unit number in for the mileage or vice versa, and that causes all kinds of problems. And we have multiple reading types on the same fuel card. For example, take an ambulance. You've got the engine for the vehicle itself, and then if there's a generator for that ambulance, we'd be getting multiple readings for that same vehicle. So those are just some of the issues that we've encountered that we're trying to work through and get right through this integration. Now I'll turn it over to Dale.
Yeah, we are happy with our integration at this point into Cityworks for fleet. But we're not stopping there. We have some other features we would like to look at in the future for implementing or adding to what we are already doing. We have looked at some different ABL devices provided by different vendors that would provide us mileage, hour meter readings, and even diagnostic alerts from the vehicles via another integration there. So those would come into the multiple reading types that we have provided by the integration that NewEdge built for us. One of the things that we opted, or at least our fleet department opted not to use initially, was the use of service request. Currently, we do everything via work orders, but we are looking to add service requests in the future to allow other departments to request work or to schedule work on their vehicle as it's needed, as well as being able to notify them when their preventive maintenance is due. Again, Joy mentioned, we had the challenge of Cityworks does not offer non-event triggered email notifications. So we have built a process using Microsoft SQL Server integration services. It's nearly complete and about to go live that will query the work orders, the preventive maintenance work orders for us, and send notifications out 3 or 4 weeks ahead of time, so the drivers or people responsible for those vehicles can schedule a time, bring it in for its normal, usual oil change, transmission oil fluid change, or registration and state inspection, tire rotations, and those kinds of things. And then we're using Crystal Reports to create a number of different reports for both preventive maintenance, so we can be predictive about when that is coming due. So if a vehicle comes into the shop prior to its maintenance, but close to it, it could go ahead and be done at that time instead of having to schedule a second trip back to fleet to be able to be processed. And then also working on reports to track that vehicle life cycle from the purchase all the way through to the sale. And also that includes a point system that our department was familiar with, and they look at cost associated with that vehicle for maintenance through its lifetime. They look at the original purchase cost of that vehicle, and also the mileage of that vehicle and its expected mileage lifetime, to help determine when they need to retire that vehicle and when it should be sold or disposed of in whatever manner that it needs to be done. Okay, next slide. At this time, I think Brian is going to show us a demo of the actual fleet app integration that is housed within Cityworks.
Thanks, Dale. Give me a second to share my screen here. Okay. So this is the fleet web application that we built for Longview to help kind of navigate through the fleet information. Here you can kind of see a list of triggers. We'll go ahead and I'll show you a new one. So this talks to Cityworks through APIs, so we can dig down into their fleet, view their group, their entity type. And then it calls to Cityworks and gets a list of all the assets. So we can select multiple assets here. If we wanted to create, let's say, maybe like a 30,000 mile, trigger for these 3 types of assets, we can do that. And we have interval types, which are, every 30,000 miles or every 5,000 miles for an oil change. We also have milestones, which is, triggered on one specific event and then it's done. So if you only have a specific, maybe 100,000 mile one that you only do once, you can do a milestone. We also have reading names. So these are actually mapped to custom fields on the work orders in Cityworks. We have an integration that runs nightly that goes through work orders and picks these values and then looks at those to see if it should trigger the next one or not. When we have descriptions, and you can add the value, 30,000 miles. And then we can also pick what type of work order that we want to assign to that trigger. So once that 30,000 miles hits, we're doing a preventative maintenance B, versus every 5,000 we're doing a preventative maintenance B. And then you can click the create button and it'll go ahead and create that trigger. So this is where you see a list of all the triggers. So I have one here that I'll pick out. So we can see it'll load the trigger information. And then here are all the readings. So we have an integration tied to US Bank that pulls in all the readings on a nightly interval. And so you can see the readings that come through, what the reading value is, what the US Bank one's all miles. The other one, if we want hours, we read those from Cityworks, since we don't have, once we get the AVL up and we can pull those sorts of things from another integration, we can throw that in there. And you also have which work orders were kicked off from that trigger. So this trigger kicked off, work order 898, 798 in Cityworks, and you can click into these, and it shows you the trigger, which trigger kicked it off, which reading kicked it off. It even shows you the work order that was created, and you can click on that, and we'll give it a second here. It will pull up the actual work order in Cityworks. And so that way you're not kind of jumping back and forth and searching through Cityworks to find, that asset ID and that specific work order. So you can go through those. Here's a list of all the readings. So you can see, through the integration, we realize, sometimes, we do have bad readings, or, somebody decides to put their employee number instead of the actual mileage, into the transaction when they're going to fill up the gas. So we found a way, through some formulas and stuff, to be able to mark those as bad readings, and then go in and take these and mark them, if they want to look at them, and mark them as a bad one. We show all the information that we get from the US Bank transaction, so you can see, what they filled up, the price of it, how much, when it was done. We show all the readings for that unit, and you have bad ones, and even if you don't, if you not have US Bank, Voyager, or some transaction like that, we can let you create a reading for that. So let's say a guy in the truck, when they're done with the day, they can go in here and pick their truck, make a mileage reading and put the odometer reading in there. We also added just an assets view that will allow them to kind of, search through here and find those vehicles. Here's the one we picked earlier. So you can see all the readings for that vehicle. This actually shows, this goes back into Cityworks with the API and pulls all work orders that have been created for that asset. We also keep a work order log. So this is all the work orders that were triggered off of this fleet application. So you can see they're working through them, and you can see, what reading value kicked it off, what the work order ID, the unit number, and you can click into these two and see, so you can go straight into the work order and kind of see the values for those two. And then, we just keep a log of, each time that we call out the US Bank to pull them, and a number of records. And, sometimes the way the US Bank Voyager works, you have different types, different statuses on the transactions, whether they're pending or not. So we may read more than we actually need, and we have a formula that goes through and checks those statuses and checks to make sure we haven't already read that reading. That way, in case something happens between US Bank and us, or something goes down, that next day we look at that, and then we can, it's down for 2 or 3 days. The next time that integration runs, it's checking those values and making sure we're not creating duplicates. And then so that's, the Fleet app it's made to be pretty simple and let you be able to get into stuff and what you need, to see. Courtney, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Brian. All right, so that concludes our presentation. So thank you guys for watching. Hopefully it was helpful. And please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thanks.